Welcome back to Grade 7 History, Unit Number 1, New France and British North America, 1713 to 1800. This is Lesson Number 10, What Caused the Mass Migration of Loyalists? Before we begin today's lesson, please consider the following. Have you ever moved to a different home, city, or country? What challenges did you face in moving to a new home? And how did you feel about moving? So please put the video on pause so that you can write down your responses to these 3 questions. All right, and let's proceed. The settlers who lived in the 13 colonies, those were the British colonies located along the east coast of North America, south of Nova Scotia, faced an important social challenge in the 1770s. Some settlers living in the 13 colonies wanted to separate from British control, while others wanted to remain loyal to British rule. Those who wanted to remain British were called Loyalists. In 1775, the American Revolution broke out. This was a war between Britain and the colonists who wanted the 13 colonies to be independent. The colonists won, and the Loyalists chose or were forced to leave the 13 colonies and settle elsewhere. And this is one of many paintings depicting the American Revolution and the general time period. So if you're really interested in studying the American Revolution through images, just go to Google image search, type in American Revolution, and you will see a lot of paintings like this one. Even before the American Revolution, a number of settlers loyal to Britain were moving to the land which is present-day Canada. After the fall of Fortress Louisbourgh and the Acadian expulsion, there were a lot of available farms and farmland in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. In 1768, the British government was placing ads in newspapers in New England. That's an area that is today the northeastern United States. These ads encouraged planters, or British settlers in New England, to move north. The chance to own land was the main pull factor for the planters. The planters wanted to own land that they could make profits from and pass down to their children. At the same time, a major push factor for the planters was the overcrowding in New England. But getting to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick would involve making a difficult journey. Between 1760 and 1768, over 8,000 planters made the journey and built communities that still exist in the Maritimes. And you can see from this map here the different routes that the planters took between 1759 and 1774, coming all the way from places like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, making the trip north and east to what are today the Maritimes. Let's backtrack and look at what caused the American Revolution. After the end of the 7 Years' War, tension between the British colonists and the British government had been growing. To cover the cost of supporting the colonies, the British had been raising taxes or creating new taxes for a number of everyday items such as sugar, stamps, and tea. The colonists were angry about having to pay these taxes, as well as having to obey laws that were being created by a government that did not represent them. So just looking at this illustration on the left, if you take a look at these signs like No Sugar Act, No Tea Act, No Stamp Act, every time the British introduced a new act, that's a law to create a new tax, British colonists held protests in the streets. So this was a pretty common scene following the 7 Years' War. On December 16th, 1773, British colonists disguised themselves as First Nations people and boarded British ships carrying valuable loads of tea. The colonists dumped all of the tea into the water. This incident became known as the Boston Tea Party. The protest was in response to a British law, the Tea Act, which made it impossible for colonial tea merchants to sell their products at a lower price than the main British tea company. Boston Tea Party would trigger a series of events that resulted in the American Revolution. And here's one of a number of paintings depicting the Boston Tea Party. You can see people near the port who are cheering on the colonists who have disguised themselves as First Nations peoples. And my question for you, and it's a question we'll talk about in tomorrow's class, is why do you think the protesters disguised themselves as First Nations people? The settlers in the 13 colonies who wanted independence were called Patriots. The British government viewed the Patriots as rebels guilty of treason, betrayal against one's country. The Loyalists wanted to remain British because they felt the Patriots could not create a strong country. Some believed that the British king was the true ruler and wanted to keep their business and political ties with Britain. Other Loyalists simply wanted to remain neutral. The American Revolution broke out in 1775, and for 6 years there was a series of battles. In 1783, the war officially ended with the Treaty of Paris, in which the Patriots were given control of the 13 colonies. The 13 colonies became the United States of America, while the lands to the north of the U.S. became known as British North America. If you're wondering, well, what happened with the Spanish and the Dutch, because they owned a fair amount of land in North America. Just over time, the American government would purchase areas like Louisiana from the Spanish, and over time, the Dutch also decided to withdraw some of their interests in North America. Life became very difficult for the Loyalists. They were harassed and attacked by the Patriots, and their loyalty to Britain was questioned. The Loyalists also risked being thrown in prison and having their property taken from them. Women who were Loyalists were in grave danger as their husbands and fathers had left home to fight in the American Revolution. The Patriots were not above attacking innocent, harmless women and children. You'll see a larger copy of this image in your textbook. This cartoon shows a loyalist being tarred and feathered by a group of patriots. The loyalist is also being forced to drink tea in reference to the Boston Tea Party. Also, tea is a very popular beverage in Britain, so to force a person, a loyalist, to drink tea against their will was considered a major insult against the British. Acts of public humiliation, as seen in this cartoon, were common during and after the American Revolution. Many Loyalists looked for a fresh start in British North America. The British government offered free land, tools, and seeds to grow crops. Britain even provided transportation, evacuating entire large groups of Loyalists out of places like the New York harbor. About 50,000 Loyalists made the journey north, about half settled in Nova Scotia. Almost all of the Loyalists had to make the decision to move just seconds before being attacked by a group of patriots. Many Loyalists, therefore, came to British North America with almost nothing, and there are a number of historical paintings depicting the Loyalist experience, showing their initial departure and their arrival in British North America. You can see they had to make makeshift tents because there were no permanent settlements in place for them. The British government also promised freedom for black slaves. They were also promised free land and equal rights if they deserted their Patriot masters and joined the Loyalist movement. About 3,000 Black Loyalists moved to Nova Scotia based on these promises. And unfortunately, compared to white Loyalists, the journey was even more difficult for Black Loyalists. Former slaves faced racist treatment in their efforts to settle and form new communities. The Haudenosaunee First Nation was divided by the American Revolution. Most were British allies, but a number sided with the Patriots. When the British gave up the 13 colonies, this included Haudenosaunee territory. Mohawk leaders John Deseronto and Thayendanegea met with British Governor Haldimand to discuss the loss of their territory. To reward the Haudenosaunee loyalty to Britain, the British government promised to purchase a large area of land from the Mississauga and the Ojibwe for the Haudenosaunee to live on. So Thayendanegea is more commonly known as Joseph Brant, and I do believe we're going to talk a little bit more about Mr. Brant in the future. But Mr. Brant did meet with Governor Haldimand, who was quite willing to set aside some land for Brant to lead his people to. So let's finish today's lesson by discussing the following. Which do you think was the biggest factor in the Loyalists' decision to move? Free land to the north or mistreatment by the Patriots? And do you think the Loyalists made the right decision to move to British North America? If not, where do you think the Loyalists should have moved to? So what you're going to do is you're going to put the video on pause so you can reread these questions, consider your answers, and then write down your thoughts because we will discuss these in greater detail tomorrow. If you don't feel comfortable in answering these questions, it means you need to go back and listen to this video or view this video at least 2 more times. And then when you're ready, put the video on pause. Okay, I look forward to us having a good discussion about all of these questions. But until our next class, this concludes today's video.